What is up, Kings fans? Welcome into the Trading Jabs season in review and playoff preview. I am joined by two very familiar faces and former Kings, and Jim Fox and Daryl Evans. Gentlemen, thanks for joining me.
A pleasure, young man.
Thanks, Jack.
Well, I do want to start with the assessment of the whole season. In terms of expectations going into what we thought of the 2022 and 23 season to what we've seen through 82 games, what have you made of the season, Daryl?
Well, I think it's been a little bit of a roller coaster, but I think at the end of the day, where the Kings are today is where I expect them to be, back in a playoff spot. I would have been very surprised and disappointed had they not made the playoffs again. So I think they lived up to those expectations. Maybe under a different set of circumstances. There's been some changes that have gone on throughout the course of the season that maybe were unexpected, but I think we've seen some growth, and I think the Kings are in a good spot moving forward.
In terms of surprises, you use the word of some unexpected things. Jim, what surprised you throughout the 82-game season from the Kings?
Well, the first thing was the start to the season and the goals against. Because we knew that the Kings had, over the last couple of years, and then into this year, with the addition of Kevin Fiala, the growth and maturity of Velarde, Kaliev to a certain extent, we had more firepower. But I think everyone we didn't expect those 9-8 games. That's probably what stood out to me as far as the surprising factor. And then we could never predict this, but Phoenix Copley.
Yeah.
I mean, that has to be a huge part of it, just because the Kings were out of options, let's put it that way. And they really had to dig deep down into the organization, and they got it. So that's where the surprises come. I think I always like to talk about the first question you asked, which was expectations, because that word in itself defines everything that happens the rest of the way. You think you're a Stanley Cup champion, or do you think you're not going to make the playoffs? I think if you polled 20 people, they might all have 20 different answers. But the 12-game point streak, I think it showed a maturity that I wasn't sure was there with this group, and that made me very happy.
Do you think the maturity came from the veterans, or did you see that kind of as a coaching staff implementing something that they had seen, or was that just a majority of the older players kind of talking to the younger guys and putting in a system? Daryl?
I think it's a combination of a lot of things. I think, when you go at the beginning of the season, as Jim mentioned, the addition of Kevin Fiala and the growth of guys like Kempe, Velarde, you think you're a lot more of an offensive type of team, and be it the Kings are. They score a lot more goals than they did, a much improved power play. But I think they got away from the type of team that they need to be in order to succeed at this time of year in the postseason, and that's playing strong defensive hockey. And because of that, I think they exposed their goaltenders early on, and it wasn't till they actually all kind of come together and finally realized that they had to get back to playing a strong checking game. The influence of guys like Kopitar, Doughty, that have been around for a lot of years, I think that really impacted the situation. Philip Deneau, he plays that style of hockey. So Edler back in the blue line. So I think they were able to spread that out amongst the young guys. And then when they had success doing it, everybody bought in, and all of a sudden the team had a whole different complexion.
We talk about maturation and getting to playing the way that they need to play in terms of playoff hockey. And you've gone 82 games now. We've seen who the Kings are. We also went 7 games in the playoffs last season. Expectations are obviously high. You've gone to a point where we thought we had a chance to move into the second round. You lose 2 straight games, and then they're out. This year, more maturation. We've been there. Experience is a big word that gets thrown around a lot of time. Both of you played in the playoffs for a handful of series. Expectations versus experience. What experience did they learn from last year's team? Jim?
Well, I think that they learned that once the series starts, you have a chance. Regardless of your opponent, you have a chance. You're there. You earned your right to be there. I think during the season, I think it's a conscious decision by Todd McLellan. Really haven't talked to him about it specifically, but to let players, and I think Phil Jackson was known for this too, let the players go through the adversity themselves without dictating how you need them to change their game or play their game and I think that allows a maturity unto itself. That allows the players to figure it out themselves. And then, along with the structure of the coaching staff, it allows them to hopefully be more productive. The experience, I think it is important. I really do. I remember my first couple playoff games, and I was just, almost shaking like a leaf. I think the one thing I learned, and I didn't play a lot of deep playoff series, but I learned that, mistakes are made. Mm-hmm. And you go on from that, and hopefully your teammates cover up for those mistakes. Mm-hmm. And I think that's, that the one mistake, if you make it in overtime, it's going to hurt you and you lose the game. But you can bounce back from mistakes, and that's what I learned, and I think experience, and that gives you maybe a little bit more confidence as a group.
Yeah, and Daryl, obviously you played in the playoffs as well. Experience, you look at what the Kings learned from last year. Obviously, you've got the veterans that have made the Stanley Cup runs, and you had guys last year that were making their first playoff appearances. How valuable is that for the young guys?
Well, I think it's huge, for those guys to get a taste of what it's like to play playoff time, the way the game is elevated. I think if the Kings put themselves in a position in a first round this year and they had a 3-2 series lead, mm-hmm. I think they'd find a way to be able to, to get the deal done. But that's something you had to go through last year. You had to experience how difficult it is. And they always say that, winning that last game is the hardest one to win. I think a lot of experience was gained. The young players grew a lot. And I think they also expect a lot more of themselves now, knowing that what it's going to take in order to, to get there. And, very might be the same opponent again this year. So what better way to measure things up? But, unfortunately, a lot of times people look at, meeting your expectations or exceeding your expectations by having success in the postseason. Yeah. And I don't think you can actually say that about the Kings this year. I think they're a better team than they were at the beginning of the season. They've grown along a lot. And if the first round doesn't happen to work out for them, so be it. But I still think they're a better team than they were a year ago.
Yeah, and Daryl just hit on it. I was asked by many people, I'm sure, how many points are the Kings going to get this year?
Yeah.
And my answer was always just get better.
Yep.
I didn't. Then they ended up with more than 99 last year. So but I thought that the team did play better. I thought they were a better team. If my brain didn't have so much experience, I probably remember the player I'm going to ask about. But I think we had a shot of Dustin Brown last year in the playoffs, like just putting his hand on one of the younger guys, just on his lap and going, it was during a game. You're okay, kid.
Yeah.
It might have even been before the game started. Mm-hmm. Like after the national anthem, we sat down and we had a shot, and we talked to the player after, and he said, that just made me feel. And that's where like a veteran guy can just, hey, it's going crazy here, but we're all here together.
Speaking of veteran players, we moved to the ageless wonder in Captain Anze Kopitar. Hits the 70-point threshold for the first time in, I believe, 5 seasons. At this stage of his career, how has Anze Kopitar been able to move his game back to another level? Daryl, I'll start with you on that one.
I think it's by having some support around them. I mean, as players get older, the experience that they've gained and continue to keep gaining, even from the young guys that come, what they learn from them is worth so much. But now you've got help around you. Now a guy like Kopitar is able to utilize his mind and his presence out there as opposed to the energy that he has to provide. You get that energy. Look at who he's had on his wing all year in Adrian Kempe. The energy that he provides on a day-to-day basis. You bring Byfield onto that line, all of a sudden, Kopitar's rejuvenated. He's got 2 young guys, 2 big bodies out there that are doing a lot of work in the trenches, and that's not to say the guys weren't doing that before, but it definitely, revitalizes you. And he's having a lot of fun. Getting back into the postseason last year was huge. I think he understands that his team has some growth and potential in them, and they've shown that. And I think that's why he, that drives his engine and makes him play the way he is.
I asked him during the season, and it was about maybe 20 games remaining. I just went to Kopi and I said, Kopi, because at that point it looked like Kevin Fiala by far was going to lead the team in points. Now with injuries, and Kopi might pass him at the end here, and I just said, Kopi, is it nice to just know that you have? I almost said, is it nice to know that you don't have to lead the team in scoring again?
Yeah.
He didn't answer. He just smiled. He just kind of went, like I don't think he wanted to answer because it might degrade someone else, or he would have to. But he just said, he said with his reaction, yes.
Yeah.
It's great to have that help around him. Two things for me: different usage on the power play, different situation, different positions, interchangeable parts, power play through the roof, and he's found another way again to get better on faceoffs. So I think it's his career high this year in faceoff percentage. So you get the puck, you play with the puck, you get some guys around you on the power play, and the power play has been borderline spectacular.
and how many times have we heard, like over the last number of years, Kopitar, Brown, and Doughty, they're waiting for guys to come up and take their jobs. Well, now there's finally some of those guys that are stepping to the forefront and taking prominent roles on this team.
Yeah, Jim, you look at Kopitar, and you may have already answered this question, but what do you think is his most valuable asset heading into the playoffs?
Wow. I think his most valuable asset is to accomplish what he accomplishes without looking flustered or crazy, or he looks in control. I think a lot has to do with his size, his body. Like, he is a strong man. So there are some guys, just because of their skating style, they appear like they're frazzled and helter-skelter, what's going on? Kopi just goes out there and uses that huge strength, powerful. And I think that other guys see that, and he really calms them down that way.
We talked about Kevin Fiala briefly, but 69 games is where he ended his regular season, 72 points. What did Kevin Fiala provide this group, Daryl, that they didn't have prior, and how much does the depth help?
Well, depth is huge, but he provided an element that wasn't in the roster. His ability to hang on to the puck, his strength, his vision on the ice. There's no mistake that the impact he's had on the power play. The opposition look upon the Kings differently now with Fiala on the ice. He can beat you one-on-one, and yet he complements every player that he's on with. Every line, no mistake, that he's played on this year, their numbers have gone up with his presence on the line. So he's had a huge impact, and I think his game has probably grown a little bit too. Maybe in the past, maybe not quite as responsible defensively. I think he's become a lot more responsible defensively, and he's playing a 200-foot game now and really enjoys where he's at.
I think Daryl hit it one-on-one. When the other team's dressing room before the game, first name on the board, Kevin Fiala. That's what now they have to worry about him.
Yeah.
And even with Kopi, even with Kempe, I don't know if there was that player that the other team had to worry about. Yeah. Now he's there, so he draws attention, opens things up, becomes an option on the power play for entries, where it was all Kempe before. Now he's the guy getting the puck into the zone, or Kempe, or Byfield now, or who, So it's going that way. I think at first 20 games, in all honesty, I think that the risk that he plays with filtered down to the team, and that's why we saw a lot of those 6'5", 9'8". Then he played 40 games where I thought he was no risk or less risk. And then when he came back near the end of the season, I thought some of that risk came back again. So, but your best player is going to have the most turnovers on your team because he has the puck all the time.
Yeah.
So, Magic Johnson, most turnovers. Well,
he had the ball. Yeah. So, definitely something to keep an eye on. Is it something that, playoff hockey, things get tighter. Everything matters a little bit more, but things tend to clamp down.
And Daryl hit it. Fiala, and I'm going to say Gabe Vilardi.
Yeah.
Two players who have been out of the lineup for a long period of time.
Mm-hmm.
Both can beat you one-on-one. And when you take that out of your lineup, that makes it a lot easier for the other team. More so than a guy, even like Kempe, who can beat you one-on-one with his speed. Fiala and Vilardi can beat you with moves. Mm-hmm. And if you're a defenseman on the other team, I think that really worries you. And it hurts the Kings when those guys aren't there, because I don't know if you can practice that. I don't know if you can. It's something they have. Mm-hmm. And it's an ability that's tough to defend.
Yeah, hard to come by. Well, we go from newcomer this season in Kevin Fiala to the latest newcomers on the Kings roster, and that's the guys they picked up at the deadline. Joonas Korpisalo, obviously in net. You pick up Vladislav Gavrikov, and then obviously Zach McEwen as well. What did you make of the moves that were made at the deadline, Daryl, and how did that improve this team to another level?
Well, we've been talking about it for a couple of years, acquiring a left shot, big body on defense, a shutdown type of guy. And that's exactly, Gavrikov comes as advertised. Mm-hmm. He leads the NHL in stick checks in the neutral zone, does a great job at standing up on a blue line, and he allows the Kings to be able to line their pairs up defensively. Mikey Anderson and Drew Doughty together, and then now Gavrikov and Matt Roy. I mean, now the Kings have, 4 defenders right there that they can put out against anybody on the ice and feel comfortable. So that was the key. That was the piece that they really needed. And then, Korpisalo coming in goal. I don't think anybody expected that to come in the same type of deal, in the same conversation.
Yeah.
And being that Jonathan Quick was, the player that got removed in the deal, there's a little bit of an unknown there. Like, how's he going to come in? How's he going to perform? He's got to make sure he eliminates himself from trying to compete against trying to be Jonathan Quick. He's just got to come in and be himself. And let's face it, he was trying to get his own career back in place. And he came into a real structured environment. The Kings did a great job at providing him a stage to be able to, to exceed on. And he's lived tall to the task. He's done exactly what you had hoped he would do. Big presence in the net, just like Copley. A lot of similarities between the two of them, the way they play. Maybe a little bit more athletic in his movement around, but he's been a real blessing for the Kings between the pipes.
Yeah, and Jim, you look at the deadline acquisitions. Does this make the Kings scarier going into a 7-game series in the playoffs?
Well, the hole that needed to be filled was filled.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that solidifies what you're looking for. I think you can make the argument that Ekholm to Edmonton is the same type of hole-filling move,
mm-hmm.
Where, do these guys jump out at you? And, no, but they fit a perfect role. One thing I think I've learned about Gavrikov is that I think he's a read and react player. I think he feels the game. Drew Doughty's that type of player. I think you might say Mikey Anderson is more of a system player.
Mm-hmm.
Gavrikov plays within the system, but he reads and reacts and he changes and he adapts and he adjusts. And that kind of surprised me about him. I thought he was just going to be that long reach defenseman. And now I see him and man, and in the Kings system, there is more than most systems, there is a different responsibility for roles for your left D and your right D.
Mm-hmm.
So for him to fit in as quickly as he did, I think tells me that he sees the game very well.
Well, Daryl, you kind of talked about how Gavrikov leads the NHL in stick checks in the neutral zone. How important does that play into a Kings system when it comes to the Kings being a 1-3-1 team when defending oftentimes in that neutral zone?
Well, it's huge. I mean, be able to anticipate in the reads that he has. His hockey IQ, as Jim just said, is probably maybe a little bit higher than a lot of us expected it to be. He does an outstanding job. And what it does, it prevents your team from spending less time in the defensive zone. And
Mm-hmm.
let's face it, you look at the shots against the Kings have allowed lately, those numbers have gone way down. And with the shots going down, the goals against go down. So, it takes care of the defensive part of the game. And then a couple of goals that he scored, we've seen a little bit of offensive flair to his game. So it's there, but again, what you want to see is defense first, and that's where his game starts, and he's really good at it.
If we're just talking numbers, and I think everyone here knows the respect I have for Jonathan Quick and his career and how he's helped change our lives with 2 Stanley Cups but just taking a look at the numbers, and I didn't make this argument, I haven't heard it a lot, but I saw it out there a little bit. The Kings prevented Vegas from getting Joonas Korpisalo. Based on the numbers.
Yeah.
Korpisalo's numbers basically were better when you go into the analytics than Quickie's.
Mm-hmm.
So now, man, let's hope that goes through in the playoffs.
Yeah.
The thing that I'm afraid of the most, I'm afraid of a lot of things, but is that for whatever reason, the Kings end up playing Vegas and Quickie has that emotional recharge.
Yeah, we've seen so
and
much.
Just,
yeah.
It's one of those where he stands on it. But if the numbers stayed the same, even going back 2-3 seasons, Vegas needed a goalie, and let's hope we got their guy.
Well, we talk about the goalies, and the Kings found success in using a tandem, oftentimes going 1-1-1-1 between Copley and Korpisalo. How important are both goalies, Jim, when it comes to making a playoff run in this year?
It's changed over the years. It used to be if you have two goalies, it means you don't have one. Now it's not the case. Even the East Coast teams that don't have travel talk about fatigue. I think the analytics shows that in a back-to-back situation, numbers drop off if the guy plays 2 in a row, so you need 2. Then you take the West Coast into consideration, the travel we have, which during March was great. But before that, during the course of 82, we're traveling way more than the teams in the East, and for that reason, you need 2.
Yeah.
And I think when you look at the two goaltenders today, too, the game is different now. The shots that you're getting, a goaltender, there's movement through the course of the game is probably so much greater than it was 10 years ago. You're looking not inside the face-off dots anymore. We're seeing guys score from base of the face-off circle over by the boards, and they're still good goals. We all look at the goalie and we point the finger at, that's a bad goal. Well, it's a bad goal, but now we have to start giving the credit to the shooters a little bit. I think the goaltending position, and with regards to the way everything else is growing, is maybe a little bit behind, like the shooters and the ability, what they're thinking and things like that. It'll catch up. But goaltenders now, there's a lot more movement up and down, side to side. There's a lot of activity out there. That way, more rest. You're not going to see guys play 75 games a year.
If he had the modern stick technology they have right now, I swear. I mean, this guy could shoot the puck with a wood stick. If he had you're right. Adrian Kempe on the Kings power play, one-time shot, he is on the boards.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter anymore because the technology it's a high percentage shot.
Yep.
You give him that, he would have fired that puck through the boards.
Do either of you think about what your game would have been if you would have played now with the technology, the style?
We're negotiating to come back next year.
Oh.
It would have helped me a lot because of this. I didn't have the shot that Daryl did he had a slap shot that was hard.
Yeah.
Really. I was more in tight and quick, but if I could load up those sticks like they do now, again, I could generate a decent shot with speed, skating, and take a slap shot.
Yeah.
The biggest difference now is a guy can be standing still in the slot, load up his stick, and it fires on the net.
Fires right off.
Like more in the past, it used to be the magician. Now it's the wand. If you learn to use that wand properly, it's amazing what these sticks can do. And as Jim mentioned, Jim had unbelievable hands. I mean, great touch. I think today's game used to have guys draped all over him, guys stick in the ribs. You're not going anywhere tonight. So he'd have a lot more time and space. I think today's game would probably benefit both of us because we are skill players. So,
well, speaking of skill players, someone that really stood out in last year's postseason was Carl Grundstrom. A real X factor that kind of came out of nowhere, so to speak, in terms of the role we expected versus how he ended up, gaining more ice time and ultimately starting to put points on the board. Jim, I'll start with you on this one. Who do you see as an X factor for the Kings heading into this postseason?
I'm going to give you 2.
Okay.
One guy who, we just all hope that finish will come.
Yep.
And it is finish. It's Rasmus Kupari. His skating ability, I know it's a fourth-line role, but I think those are the type of guys we're talking about, right? The guys that we're not going to expect.
Yeah.
His puck possession is really good. His skating, we know. We just want him to finish a little bit more.
Yeah.
But I still want him to understand that when he has the puck, the other team doesn't. And that's an important factor in a game. And then the other guy to me, he's kind of had a very difficult year. And he's been back now for a while, but I think Trevor Moore, if he could I think he's struggling a little bit with confidence, and but you know what? Once the playoffs start, it's a new
slate.
You forget about the regular, okay, I wanted to get 18 goals this year.
Yeah.
And then you get into a position, you go, I'm not going to reach that. And you want team success, but every player has inside what they think, what's a number. And I think maybe Trevor, hopefully he can get it back.
How much throughout your career did you deal with that mentally in terms of setting goals for expectations going into a season versus, realizing maybe I'm not going to get to that? And how much does a clean slate going into the playoffs help?
For me, I worried too much when I got close to 25, close to 30. That was just my mindset. Worried. I was more nervous that I wasn't going to reach it.
Yeah.
The closer I got to it. So that deflected my focus from where it should have been.
Gotcha.
I didn't go in the beginning of the year okay, I'm going to it was more like, okay, you're going through the year and then you get close to
some milestone, yeah. Daryl, I'll go to you on the same question. You look at the X factors. There's quite a few names that the Kings could lean on or hope to get that boost from that could get them over the hump, at least past that first round matchup. Who do you see as an X factor for the Kings?
Well, I'm going to go with Quinton Byfield. And be it that he's on the number one line, he's already in a position where he can excel.
Yep.
He has brought a lot to that line and with regards to work along the boards and that, but has yet to bring the finish, same finish that Kopitar is looking for. And if he can bring some finish to that top line, being that he's on a power play unit as well, the Kings will have tapped a resource that they haven't used basically through the course of the season, being that he had 3 goals during the regular season. So I think he has got that ability to be able to have an impact in the postseason and be one of the guys that might surprise you.
And as we wrap up here on Tradin Jabs, I'll give you both kind of the final thought. Jim, I'll lead with you on this one. Your final thoughts of this team heading into the playoffs?
I'm still uncertain because of injury and how much 2 of your top one-on-one players will be able to be effective. I think it's a concern. I like the fact that the power play was successful during the regular season. I always get worried that that's going to drop off just a little bit in the playoffs. But I think that's a weapon they didn't have before. So it gives me a little bit better feeling that they can do that. I do think that when given the opportunity, they can lock it down. So,
yeah.
But you know what? Each year, I think we're seeing a little bit more tempo and flow and offense in playoff situations that we weren't used to seeing before. So we'll see if that continues. With some of the teams that the Kings in the West probably want to see a little bit slower. But
yeah, absolutely. Daryl, same to you.
I'm excited. I'm excited to see them back in the postseason. Be it, as Jim mentioned, you want to be as healthy as you possibly can. A couple of guys that we've talked about in Fiala and Velarde, the impact that they could have. But I also go back to last year in the postseason without Drew Doughty, without Victor Arvidsson in that series, and how other guys stepped their game up to take an opportunity of a chance that was there. There's been a couple of guys that have been, in and out of the lineup or up and down in the lines, and it's a chance for them to step to that stage. I think the Kings are more prepared this year for the postseason. What we've seen over the last couple of months, the defensive play, timely penalty kills, power play has been probably the most consistent element of the Kings' game throughout the course of the year. So I think the Kings are in a good spot, and now it's just a matter of going out there and getting it done.
No question about it. Daryl, Jim, thanks for joining Tradin Jabs.
Pleasure.